In the beginning, there was a lot of people, a lot of voices, but in all battles, sometimes people fall away.
This is May Hazelton. She's a veteran and Lake County resident, and on August 10th, she was helping organize a march down Main Street in Tavares, Florida. It's about 2 hours before protesters are set to assemble, and she's hoping for a crowd.
We need numbers, and so I'm anxious for numbers to get here.
To understand why May is preparing to protest, let's look back at a county commission meeting that took place 11 days earlier.
When I think about the statue, I have a vision of African American men being hung from trees and castrated. I have a vision of African American families being separated. I have a vision of African American women being abused and raped.
This is the public comment phase of the Lake County Commissioners meeting that took place on July 30th. Charles Young and dozens of others spoke in opposition to the transfer of a Confederate general statue to the taxpayer-supported Lake County Historical Museum.
You have the authority to say we're going to represent all of Lake County, not just the few that wants to rule the county. You have the authority, as we elected you to do, be our leaders. So I say to you, stand up and lead.
The bronze figure, which depicts Confederate General Edmond Kirby Smith, is one of 2 statues meant to honor great Floridians in the Capitol's National Statuary Hall. It's scheduled to be removed sometime in 2020 to make room for a statue of Mary McLeod Bethune, an African-American educator and voting rights activist. That gave Lake County Museum curator Bob Grenier an idea.
We'd be privileged and honored if you chose the Lake County Historical Museum in Tavares, give Tavares to be that great cultural and arts center like Orlando, Tampa, Sarasota, Daytona. Give us the opportunity to do that.
Grenier wants to do this by bringing the Smith statue to the Lake County Historical Museum, which is housed in the county's historic courthouse. The courthouse was the venue in 1949 for a notoriously unjust and racially biased trial of young black men known as the Groveland Four. 2 men were killed and 2 were brutalized and convicted after being falsely accused of raping a white woman. The 4 men were posthumously pardoned in January 2019. The museum now sits in the same courthouse building where 3 of the men were taken down into the basement and tortured by Sheriff Willis McCall.
He hangs them from pipes with handcuffs so their toes and balls of their feet are just touching cut glass on the floor.
During his time as sheriff, McCall used the fear of unwarranted arrests for loitering to intimidate black men into working for the growing citrus industry.
It was like basically debt slavery. Willis McCall oversaw that, and he had this really powerful hold on Lake County for more than 28 years.
Before the public was aware that he planned to bring the Edmond Kirby Smith statue to this building, museum curator Bob Grenier said he had secured private support from Lake County's commission in his pitch to Florida's Statue Location Selection Committee.
All 5 county commissioners, who will supply you with letters or anything you need, are supporting the acquisition of this statue of Edmond Kirby Smith.
In response, Hazelton and others in the community urged Lake County's 5 commissioners to block the statue during a public vote. They also plan to hold a rally leading up to the museum steps.
I'm a little nervous right now because it's about 8:45-ish, 9 o'clock, and I'm waiting for a sea of faces.
Send it back! Send it back! Send it back! Now! Send it back! Now! Send it back! Now!
You want healing and not more pain. You want to feel at home in your community. So I'm calling on Governor Ron DeSantis. Listen to the goals of the people. Listen to the wishes of the people. It's time to wake up and listen.
But let's pause for a moment. Why has the commission voiced support for the transfer of the statue? Leslie Campione is the outspoken chairwoman of the commission, who arguably has the influence to stop the statue from coming to Lake County, but she has backed the statue in the past with a clear argument. What happened throughout Lake County's history was horrific. and that's why we shouldn't forget it.
What Commissioner Blake said about burying history, I think that's the thing that has really bothered me the most about this entire discussion leading up to this time, was history hurts because mankind has done awful things throughout history to one another. It's just the reality of history. And that's where these important lessons come from, by not burying or deleting history.
But University of Central Florida historian Jim Clark says that the Smith statue is an odd choice for a museum centered on the history of Lake County and the state of Florida.
Lake County wasn't created until 1887, more than 2 decades after the Civil War ended. It was originally part of Orange County. There's no indication that Kirby Smith came to Lake County, what is now Lake County. He had nothing to do with Lake County, and in fact, he had almost nothing to do with Florida. His father was appointed to an administrative position in St. Augustine, but he was sent away to a private school. Then he went away for the war, and after the war, he never returned to Florida.
Even if Smith doesn't have a link to Lake County, Campione describes the statue's potential transfer as an opportunity to look back historically at the Civil War.
It will, quote, not be displayed in a way that glorifies the man nor the Confederacy, but will be strictly historical in nature.
However, it's not clear that Bob Grenier, the museum curator, has an objective relationship with the Confederacy, and it was his vision that initiated this transfer process. Take a look at this email Grenier sent to members of Confederate heritage groups that May Hazelton said she acquired from an anonymous source.
He said, "I believe I fought the good fight for my Confederate friends. I stayed true to your cause. I'll fight them off as long as I can with your help. Y'all are the most incredible people I've ever met in my entire life, and I love all of you." The museum curator's May 1st email clearly tells us the plan. It is to glorify the man in the Confederacy. And I have that email, and I will gladly provide it to anybody that wants it. I have the email.
Let's move on to how Grenier speaks about the time during which the statue was built. The Edmond Kirby Smith statue represents the myth of a noble Confederate cause, but it is not a relic of the Civil War. It was built over 50 years later, as part of a narrative of racial intimidation.
This idea of these statues doesn't happen right after the Civil War. It comes in the 1890s as the Jim Crow era begins, the real suppression of African Americans in the South, the worst period since slavery, and the Daughters of the Confederacy launched this massive propaganda campaign. They lobby the states to rewrite the textbooks, to defend slavery, to say it was benign, and so it's this massive push to buy statues.
The second, smaller surge in Confederate monument building came in response to civil rights efforts in the 1960s. This data from the Southern Poverty Law Center suggests that these statues were erected not to remember the past, but to send a clear message that white supremacy should continue in the present.
At each point, it was to tell the African American community to put us in our place and to marginalize us, to make us fearful, to tell us where we belong, that we were second-class citizens.
This is how Grenier speaks about the construction of the statue during Jim Crow.
Just like in 1922 when the citizens of Florida put General Edmond Kirby Smith up there, still today it's a Florida story.
Grenier's office did not respond to multiple requests for an interview, but we know another relevant fact about him. He once disclosed to an Orlando Sentinel reporter that he sits at the same desk that once belonged to Sheriff Willis McCall. In the public comments Campione has made about the statue, she hasn't discussed Grenier's affection for Confederate heritage groups, or his description that he wants to tell a similar story to those who constructed the statue in 1922.
Some residents have stated they believe the decision is indicative of current-day racism and is being made for the purpose of inflicting harm by disregarding their feelings, because in my heart, nothing could be further from the truth.
I wanted to ask Campione about this, but she declined to be interviewed for this story. May Hazelton finds it hard to believe Campione's assurances that moving forward the exhibit will frame Edmond Kirby Smith in an accurate way.
All of a sudden, you just simply want us to believe we're going to do this right. The whole process was wrong, But now you want us all of a sudden to just throw up our heads and say, we trust you to do it right.
As Lake County residents waited for a decision from the commission, one of the people present was Grace Arnold, a Lake County resident and descendant of Confederate families. She says she wishes people that engage in glorifying the Confederacy would let go of the lost cause myth.
Yeah, they're just glorifying with all these monuments and statues to the war and the glorious cause and blah, 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 blah. Well, it was all just a myth, just a fantasy. It's not true.
Commission Chairwoman Leslie Campione made clear her position in favor of the statue in a pre-written statement at the start of the board meeting.
It is important to preserve statues and monuments which tell the story of where we've come from and where we are today, even if those artifacts invoke strong emotions.
However, statue opponents still had hope that at least 3 of the remaining commissioners would vote in their favor, granting them a win.
We don't whitewash history in this country. We learn from history. And so I will, continue to be an opponent of government censorship. I'll continue to support whatever the museum board decides on this statue. And I really appreciate you all being here today.
It is my own personal opinion that the Kirby Smith statue might be or could be interesting and informative. However, the process should have cleared up any doubt as to whether the end was predetermined. And it is apparent to me there still remains a lot of doubt.
If it didn't come, it wouldn't hurt anyone, except maybe the feelings of a few who would really like to have it here. If it does come, I think it's going to hurt for a long time.
I feel bad that we haven't had this conversation before all this went forward, okay? But it has gone forward, okay? And I don't believe we have the authority to not take this.
My voice would not have been heard in 1922. I would have died, been killed, rather than had my voice heard in 1922. But we fast forward to where we are now, and still my voice was not heard in this community. I grew up here. I remember a burning cross. I remember that. I remember going to the Tavares High School and being called the N-word as a scared 7th grader. I remember that. But I came back. I came back because this is home. And I live in an integrated neighborhood, and my neighbors care about me. I thought I came back to a place that had changed, and I still believe that. I believe it has changed. I don't want this to make me think it hasn't changed.